Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? I will come again, and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may also be. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid.
I feel greatly privileged to say just a few words about Peter and my service with him in the early 80s at Deepcut in Surrey, where he was the commanding officer of the training battalion and depot of the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, where I was the senior first selection officer. He was what I would term a kind CO, whereby he understood the many trials and tribulations that recruits were undergoing, many for the first time that they had ever been away from home. Whilst he imposed discipline, which was a culture shock to many, it was always fair and just. He encouraged the young soldiers to give of their best and gave unequivocal support in everything that they did, both at work and at play, and could always be seen on the touchline encouraging them in unit sports and giving them praise. He was constantly inquiring of their welfare and was incessant that platoon commanders were aware and let him know of any problems that arose. He was blessed with a tremendous sense of army humour. At one meeting in late autumn, and with a chill in the air and the nights drawing in, we were chatting of ideas to keep the recruits busy and give them a short break away from the unit. In doing so, he asked his second in command, who was Maltese by birth and known affectionately as the Maltese Falcon, to look into this. It didn't take him long to come back, and he said, "Colonel, I have been given permission by a headquarters brigade for us to exercise on Dartmoor in December." To which Peter replied, "Oh no." Well, thereafter the exercise was commissioned and carried out under the name of Exercise 001. In the middle of Dartmoor, it was with rain and with temperatures heading towards zero, the exercise of 4 days took place. Peter wanted no special treatment. He had his bivouac just like the rest of us. He cooked his breakfast on his little hexamine cooker and chugged quite happily across Dartmoor. In fact, he did everything that his subordinates did. This was the mark of the man. He set a wonderful example in everything that he did and was so respected by everyone that he met. His was a very happy unit, administered with passion, pride and understanding. And I was proud to be a small part of it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I had the privilege of first meeting Peter in 1982, whilst he was commanding the training battalion, as you just heard, at Deepcut, and I was instructing at Sandhurst. And what followed was 40 years of friendship and fun. What were Peter's key qualities? For me, he was always a gentleman. He was very sociable, incredibly considerate. He was an outstanding skier and a safe sailor. He was a wonderful friend, but above all, he was a jolly good egg. Peter, with dear Chalky, That, for those of you who don't understand, is Janet. From the Giles cartoons, years and years ago, all teachers were known as Chalky. So Peter and dear Chalky had many groups of friends, of which we were just one. We called ourselves the Team. Indeed, we even had a tie procured for the Henley Regatta by Leslie, Peter's dear friend. Unfortunately, I don't have the tie anymore. I lost it. Then the amazing parties at Armour House, which was the home of the commanding officer at Deepcut. I still drive past it today because I live nearby. It's still standing amongst the huge developments at Deepcut. And what a warm feeling it gives me every time I go by. Peter introduced us all to the Henley Regatta and a chap called John Leiths, who was part of the Butlersfield folklore. Butlersfield, by there's a car park. Many lunches and Pim's bar sessions have now rowed down the river, but all with the unmistakable stamp of Peter at his entertaining best. I remember riding on the coaches from Windsor Castle Mews, courtesy of Leslie, to the Royal Enclosure at Ascot. What a hoot. Except we were soaked by the rain on the way back one particular evening. I always felt that Ascot was where Peter and his dear friend Leslie were in their element. They could be hilariously pompous and down to earth at the same time, and with their complimentary and sometimes wicked sense of humour, they were incorrigible. Peter always said that the army allowed him to pursue his key hobbies of skiing and sailing. I think Peter taught most of his friends either how to ski or to ski even better. He was an amazing instructor, and I know in later years he took great pride in teaching his grandchildren. I often feel I did not quite come up to his standards with his encouraging side remarks such as stick to rugby. Then there was Outback. Our rowdy behaviour incurred the wrath of a fellow guest, no less than an Air Marshal Hein, who was the Air Officer commanding RAF Germany, a very senior man. Peter caught Leslie dressed as a vicar with a dog collar made out of a serviette, chatting some young attractive ladies in the disco. And a few years later, we encountered the Air Marshal again at Henley Regatta at a lunch, and I'm glad for Peter and Leslie's sake to say that the Air Marshal's memory had dimmed. At Val d'Isère we had many trips, but one such trip was when we bumped into my twin brother on the slopes with his teenage children, totally unexpected. And when we were all coming down together, from the lift looking up the slope, you could be forgiven for thinking that Peter was being helped down the slope by a gorgeous blonde. In fact, it was the other way round. He was stopping to instruct my niece on how to get down. However, we still ribbed him for it throughout. And of course there was Courchevel, where he broke his collarbone, and I acted as his valet on the return train journey. This is a relationship that suited Peter very well. I will touch on sailing a bit later. I must not forget the great Derby Day party at Bream Cottage. What a party. We finished at 4 in the morning and all ended up inside the Epsom racetrack near the finishing line at 9 o'clock in the morning for breakfast. Most of us fell asleep. We were woken up surrounded by the Welsh Guards band. Please don't ask how it all happened. We don't know, and certainly Peter didn't. Then along came the great project, building Swiss Lodge. What a fantastic testament to Peter, his creativity, his graft, and determination. I always took great pride in helping install the dining room bay window. Probably it's still the only wonky part of the build. Peter was always creating, building, or repairing something. And of course that brings me on to sailing. Before I knew him, he had built a ferrous concrete hulled yacht, yes, a hull made of concrete. But when I knew him, he bought a yacht in southern Italy. And Peter and Chalky named it Harlequin. He spent 2 or 3 years with Chalky refurbishing it. Now I remember driving down through Italy in the Discovery with Peter and Chalky. We had a caravan with all the tools and all our gear in tow. The caravan also acted as a great buffer to the madcap Italian drivers bringing up our rear. And at 6 each evening precisely, we would scramble into the caravan for a couple of hours with a bottle, while swarms of mosquitoes buzzed us. It was a lovely place. And returning via Monte Cassino one year, we had a Monty Python moment, with Peter grabbing the car park attendant by the ear and using a few choice words. Chalky and I could only stand, watch and laugh. It was amazing. We had many lovely sailing trips out of Gouvier, Marina and Corfu, where he and Janet spent many happy summers living on Harlequin. I could go on with lots of stories, but my final memory was when I returned to Southampton on completing the Global Challenge yacht race. As we entered Ocean Village after 10 months sailing, there on the quayside, unannounced, was Peter and Chalky. It was the best surprise, and for me summed up an incredibly important friendship with a quite wonderful person. So let me finish. He was a professional soldier, an excellent ski instructor, a true gentleman, sociable, considerate, great humour, a generosity of spirit, and a wonderful friend to us all. Thank you very much.
I'm going to read a passage written by a Roman statesman. It's called The Letters of Marcus Tullius Cicero. All things that are done according to nature may be reckoned good. And what is more according to nature than for old men to die? This happens sometimes to young men, although nature resists and struggles against it, so that when young men die, it's as if a blazing fire was suddenly extinguished by a great deluge of water. But old men die like a fire that goes out gently, of its own accord, for want of fuel. And as apples, when they're green, require to be pulled from the tree by force, but when fully ripe fall of their own accord, so life is, as it were, wrested from young men, whereas old men yield it up spontaneously. Death, to me, as I approach nearer to it, seems as pleasurable as if I was sighting land and was just going into port after a long voyage.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I just want to say a few words about my pa. As with most children, I learnt lessons from Dad. The first, probably about curiosity, often about machinery and the way it worked. An early lesson came with a push lawnmower, making an odd noise. By the time Dad came home from work, I had dismantled it into as many pieces as a young lad could. We reassembled it together. And it sort of worked again. Not well, but it worked. As with everything John refers to, Dad as an instructor, we sat down and went through the lessons. If it wasn't broken, probably best to leave it alone. The handful of bits left over were probably unnecessary in the original design. And if you hear an odd noise from machinery, turn the radio up. And that's a tactic that's worked in most of my cars ever since. The fourth lesson came when we marched out of the married quarter. We discovered that the army didn't actually check the operation of a lawnmower when you marched out. Dad shared with me both a love of the written word and a lifelong passion for water and boats. Believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. In my early teens, Dad taught me about the hydroplane effect. Jan will probably remember this. Dad had acquired a speedboat, and I adored it. One morning he said we should try water skiing, and that I was to go first. Something to do with being character forming. We took up a triangular piece of the cabin sole, tied a piece of rope to the finger hole. Dad took up the slack slowly, and we set off, building up speed as I clung to the board. I gained confidence with shouted advice from the boat as I crossed the wake back and forth. I may have lost my trumps at this stage, or maybe it was slightly later, when I discovered hydroplane effect by pressing down on the front of the board. Seconds later I was bouncing off the lake bottom. So, being intuitive, I pulled up on the front of the board, rose hurriedly, left the water to the full extent of the tow rope, and then just exploded across the lake. I think the howls of laughter were probably heard in Roermond. With cooking, Dad always employed the element of surprise, just as any good army officer should. And one evening we were coming into berth beside a Dutch canal, and somehow, I won't at this point mention the missing rail on the stern of the boat, I fell in, clutching the ensign and staff. I swam to the pontoon with much encouragement in quest not to lose the ensign. And Jan wrapped me up in towels, and I shivered, and Dad handed me a cup of soup. With the cryptic remark, I put something warming in it. Yeah, I knew my dad, so I was vaguely wondering whether he'd put rum in soup or something else. It was something else. The bit of something rather like dried tomato skin was in fact a whole chili. And Dad was entirely right, they'd never been warmer. So amongst the greatest things that Dad taught me, I think, was about the possession of humour. And that he had an absolutely magical sense of mischief and the absurd to go with it, which I'm certain that most of you, all of you, will remember from having met him.